The gold leaf invitation to my own 65th birthday party was still resting on the marble mantel, a mocking reminder of a celebration that would never happen. I watched from the wingback chair as the locksmith knelt by the front door, the metallic scrape of his tools echoing through the hollow grandeur of the foyer. My son Daniel stood by the window, his back to me, silhouetted against the gray afternoon sky. He was wearing the same navy suit he'd worn to the Halbrook gala, the one that made him look every bit the powerful successor he imagined himself to be. "It's for the best, Mother," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth that used to define our Sundays. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. The estate is too large for one person. The upkeep alone is staggering, and the debts Father left behind, they are substantial. We had to make a choice. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap. They were the hands of a woman who had spent 40 years building the Halbrook name alongside a man who had promised to protect her. Now that man was gone, and the son we had raised was handing the keys to our history to a stranger. "The debts," I repeated quietly. My voice didn't shake, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Your father didn't leave debts, Daniel. He left a legacy. He left a safety net for all of us." Daniel finally turned. There was a sharp, impatient flicker in his eyes. "You aren't seeing the full picture. Your health hasn't been what it was. Vanessa and we've talked it over. You need a place that's manageable. A place where people can look after you." "A managed care facility," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You've already picked one out, haven't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was his confession. Behind him, through the tall glass windows, I saw a black sedan pull up into the driveway. It wasn't the car that usually took me to the market or the theater. It was a hired transport, sleek and anonymous. The locksmith stood up, his task finished. He handed 2 gleaming silver keys to Daniel. "All set, sir. The old ones won't work anymore." Daniel nodded and dismissed the man with a wave that was far too practiced for a 30-year-old. He then walked toward me, holding out a small, designer suitcase. It was one of the 3 I owned, packed by Vanessa, no doubt. It contained only the bare essentials, a few dresses, some sweaters, and perhaps a photograph or 2. Everything else, the grand piano, the portraits, the silk rugs from our travels, the very air of my life, was being locked away from me. "The car is here," Daniel said. He reached out as if to take my arm, but I stood up before he could touch me. I smoothed down my dark blue dress, the same one I had worn to the gala where I first realized my children looked at me not as a mother, but as a liability. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. For months, I had sensed the whispers behind closed doors. The way Daniel and Vanessa would fall silent when I entered a room. The way they looked at the deed to this house with hunger disguised as concern. "I won't be going to the facility, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. He frowned, a patronizing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mother, don't make this difficult. We've already signed the papers. As your legal guardians. You signed papers based on a medical evaluation that was as forged as your concern," I interrupted. I picked up my purse from the side table. "You think because I am 65 I am blind. You think because I stayed quiet while your father ran the business, I didn't learn how he did it." Daniel's face hardened. The mask of the dutiful son slipped, revealing the cold, calculating businessman beneath. "It doesn't matter what you think you know. This house is sold. The locks are changed. You have nowhere else to go. Now get in the car." I looked at him one last time. I looked for the little boy who used to hide behind my skirts when lightning thundered. He wasn't there. There was only a stranger in an expensive suit. "You're right about one thing," I whispered. "I don't belong here anymore." I walked past him, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. I didn't look back at the portraits or the memories. I walked out the front door, down the stone steps, and straight to the waiting sedan. The driver opened the door, expecting to take me to the Golden Oaks facility Daniel had booked. "Change of plans," I told the driver as I climbed into the back seat. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, confused. "Mom?" Mr. Halbrook said. "Mr. Halbrook doesn't hold the ledger for my life," I said, reaching into the hidden pocket of my purse. I pulled out a small, crumpled slip of paper. It was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but the address was etched into my mind. I had kept it for 24 years, hidden in the lining of my shoes, in the back of old journals, in the deepest recesses of my heart. It was a secret that would have destroyed my marriage with Thomas, a secret that Daniel and Vanessa never could have imagined. The driver took the paper, his eyebrows rising as he read the address. It wasn't in the wealthy suburbs or the manicured districts of the elite. It was in a gritty, hard-working part of the city, a place where people built things with their hands. "Are you sure about this, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Quite sure," I replied, staring out the window as we rolled past the iron gates of the Halbrook estate. As we pulled away, I saw Daniel standing on the porch, his silhouette shrinking in the distance. He was holding the new keys, triumphant in his theft, thinking he had finally silenced the woman who knew too much about the shaky foundations of his empire. He thought I was a woman with no options, a woman whose story had reached its final, quiet chapter. He didn't know that for 24 years, I had been paying a different kind of debt. I had been sending money to a blind trust, watching from the shadows as a young man with my father's jawline and my own stubborn streak worked his way through the toughest law school in the country. I had watched him become a man of law, a man of justice, a man who didn't know his mother's name, but knew her heart through the letters I had sent anonymously. I leaned back against the leather seat, the cold air of the evening beginning to seep through the glass. My journey wasn't ending in a sterile room with a view of a garden I didn't plant. It was beginning on a doorstep I should have crossed decades ago. As the taxi veered away from the highway that led to the nursing home and turned toward the heart of the city, I felt a tremor of fear, but beneath it, a surge of something I hadn't felt in years: power. Daniel thought he had emptied my life, but he had only cleared the path. The city lights began to blur into streaks of neon as we entered the older districts. The buildings here were made of brick and grit, standing tall against the wind. We pulled onto a narrow street lined with ivy-covered brownstones. The driver slowed down, checking the numbers on the doors. "This is it, ma'am," he said, pulling to the curb in front of a modest but impeccably kept house. "Number 412. I looked at the house. A single light was burning in the upstairs window. My hand went to the handle of the car door, but I hesitated. I had spent a lifetime being the perfect Emily Halbrook, the woman who followed the rules and protected the family image at all costs. But that woman had been locked out of her own home. I stepped out onto the damp pavement. The rain was starting to fall, a light drizzle that turned the streetlights into glowing orbs. I took my suitcase from the driver, thanked him, and watched as his taillights disappeared into the dark. I was alone. No husband, no official children, no mansion. Just a woman on a sidewalk with a secret that was about to become a reality. I walked up the 3 stone steps to the door. My heart was beating so loudly, I thought the neighbors might hear it. I reached out to press the buzzer, my fingers trembling. This was the moment the world would tilt. This was the moment the Halbrook legacy would truly begin to crumble. I pressed the button. Inside the house, I heard a chime. Footsteps approached, steady, heavy, confident. The lock turned with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet street. The door swung open. A man stood there. He was tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that were so familiar they took my breath away. He was wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a legal badge was clipped to his belt, catching the light from the hallway. He looked at me, a rain-soaked woman of 65 with a single suitcase and a look of desperate hope. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and professional. I looked at him, seeing the child I had been forced to give up to save a reputation that had ultimately betrayed me. I realized then that I wasn't just at a doorstep. I was at the beginning of a war. "I hope so," I whispered, my voice finally cracking. "Because I have nowhere else to go, Leo." He froze. He didn't know who I was, but he knew that name. And as he looked closer at my face, at the eyes that matched his own, the professional mask on his face began to shatter. The rain had turned from a drizzle into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the pavement. Leo stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the warm light of the hallway. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the rain and the distant hum of a city that didn't care about the two of us. He didn't move. He didn't reach out. He simply watched me with a gaze that was far too sharp for a stranger, yet lacked the recognition of a son. "Leo," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "How do you know that name?" I clutched the handle of my suitcase until the plastic bit into my palm. I'm the one who sent the letters. The one who made sure the tuition was paid. The one who never stopped looking from the edge of the frame. His eyes widened, then narrowed almost instantly. Leo was a man of the law. He was trained to look for the lie, the angle, the motive. He stepped back, not to welcome me in, but to create space for a proper interrogation. The blind trust. The Halbrook scholarship that didn't exist on any university register. You're the anonymous benefactor? I am Emily, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And I am in trouble. He looked past me, scanning the dark street for a tail or a waiting car. Seeing nothing but the empty rain, he finally stepped aside. Get inside. You're shivering. The interior of the brownstone was a stark contrast to the Halbrook mansion. There were no marble floors or gold leaf moldings here. Instead, there were built-in bookshelves overflowing with legal texts, a worn leather sofa, and the faint, comforting scent of roasted coffee and old paper. It was a home built on merit, not on inherited status. Leo led me to the kitchen and moved with an efficient grace, putting a kettle on the stove. He didn't ask for my coat. He waited for me to offer it. He didn't offer a hug. He offered a chair. You're Emily Halbrook, he said, turning to face me as the kettle began to hiss. I know the name. Everyone in the legal circuit knows the Halbrooks. Your son Daniel has been making quite a splash in the real estate market lately. Aggressive. Some would say reckless. He sold the house today, I said, the words finally feeling real now that I had spoken them to someone else. He changed the locks. He had a car waiting to take me to a facility in the countryside. He's filed for legal guardianship, claiming I'm no longer of sound mind. Leo's hands stilled on the counter. On what grounds? A series of incidents he's been documenting for months. Small things. A stove left on, which I didn't do. A forgotten appointment, which he canceled himself. And finally, a forged psychological evaluation signed by a doctor who happens to be on the board of his new development project. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope I had managed to snatch from Daniel's study a week ago. I slid it across the wooden table. Leo didn't open it immediately. He looked at me, really looked at me, searching for the ghost of the woman who had abandoned him 24 years ago. Why me? He asked quietly. After all these years of silence, why come to the son you gave away to save your marriage to Thomas Halbrook? The question was a knife, clean and sharp. I deserved the sting of it. Because Thomas is dead, I said. And the world he built was a cage. I gave you up because he told me he would ruin you. And the woman who raised you, if I ever acknowledged you. I thought by staying away, by just sending the money, I was keeping you safe from the Halbrook shadow. But now that shadow is trying to swallow me whole. Leo finally picked up the envelope. He flipped through the pages, the forged medical reports, the predatory loan documents Daniel had signed using the estate as collateral, and the secret bank transfers. As he read, the air in the room seemed to sharpen. The district attorney in him was waking up. Daniel isn't just trying to sideline you, Leo muttered, his eyes scanning a line of figures. He's hemorrhaging cash. He's used the family trust to fund a series of high-risk offshore investments that have failed. He needs you declared incompetent so he can liquidate the primary estate assets without a vote from the board. He's not just an ungrateful son, he's a desperate one. Can you stop him? I asked. Leo looked up from the papers. A small, grim smile played at the corners of his mouth. Stopping him is easy. But you didn't come here just to stop him, did you, Emily? No, I said, my resolve hardening into something cold and crystalline. I want him to feel exactly what I felt when that locksmith turned the key. I want him to realize that the weak mother he tried to discard is the only reason he ever had a chair at the table. Leo stood up and walked over to a chalkboard on the wall, covered in case numbers and court dates. He erased a corner of it and wrote one name in bold, white chalk, Halbrook. He thinks he's won because he has the keys to the house, Leo said, turning back to me. But he forgot one thing. I've been building a case against Halbrook Enterprises for 6 months on suspicion of money laundering. I just lacked a witness with internal access. Someone who knew where the black ledger was kept. Thomas kept it in the library. I said, a spark of triumph lighting in my chest. behind the false front of the 1922 Encyclopedia Britannica set. Daniel thinks it's just a decoration. He hasn't found it yet. Leo's eyes ignited. For the first time, the distance between us seemed to bridge, not through a mother's love, but through a shared hunger for justice. If we get that ledger, we don't just stop the guardianship. We dismantle his entire empire. He walked back to the table and sat down, leaning in close. The lamplight caught the silver in his hair. The same silver that had started to appear in mine. It's going to be a bloodbath, Emily. He'll come for you with everything he has. He'll drag your name through the mud. He'll call you a liar, a madwoman, and a traitor. Are you ready for that? I thought about the gold leaf invitation on the mantel. I thought about the cold click of the lock. I thought about the 24 years I had spent pretending I didn't have a second son while Daniel groomed himself for a throne he didn't earn. Daniel thinks he's the king of that mountain, I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. He doesn't realize the mountain is made of glass, and I'm the one holding the hammer. Leo nodded slowly. He reached across the table, not to hold my hand, but to take the pen I was holding. He began to draft a series of emergency injunctions. Then we start tonight, he said. But there's one more thing. What? You're staying here, Leo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not as a guest, and not as a benefactor. If we're going to do this, we do it as partners. You provide the intel. I provide the law. And Emily. I looked at him, hope warring with the exhaustion in my bones. Tomorrow morning, the first thing we do is file a motion to vacate that guardianship, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes his senile mother has the district attorney's office sitting in her corner. As he went back to the documents, I looked out the window at the rain. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in 65 years, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. I was the one bringing it. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the heavy gray clouds of the city, casting a pale, clinical light across Leo's kitchen table. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night wrapped in a borrowed wool blanket, watching the digital clock on the microwave blink away the minutes until dawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the metallic thunk of the new locks being installed at the mansion. The sound of my life being shuttered. Leo was already dressed when he emerged from his room at 6 a.m. He looked different today. The casual investigator from the night before was gone, replaced by a man in a charcoal suit so sharp it looked like armor. He carried a briefcase that seemed heavy with the weight of the documents we had organized. Eat something, he said, gesturing toward a plate of toast he'd prepared. The court opens at 8. We need to be there before Daniel's lawyers can file the final certification for your guardianship. If we miss that window, we're fighting from the bottom of a very deep hole. I'm not hungry, I said, though my voice was steadier than I expected. I'm ready. He paused, his hand on the handle of his briefcase. He looked at me, really looked at me, not as a legal puzzle, but as a person. Emily, once we walk into that building, there's no turning back. Daniel will see this as an act of war. He will use every secret he knows about you to prove you're unstable. He'll mention the lost years after your husband's death. He'll mention your withdrawal from social life. Let him, I replied, standing up and smoothing my blue dress. He thinks my silence was a sign of weakness. He's about to find out it was a collection of evidence. The courthouse was a monolith of granite and echoing hallways. As we walked through the metal detectors, I felt the eyes of the city's legal elite on us. Leo was a known entity here, the man who didn't lose. Seeing him flanked by a woman they all recognized from the society pages sent a ripple of whispered curiosity through the lobby. We reached courtroom 4B just as the doors were opening. And there they were. Daniel was standing near the front bench, flanked by 2 lawyers in suits that cost more than a mid-sized car. Vanessa was beside him, her hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of practiced tragedy. She was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the grieving daughter to perfection for the benefit of any onlookers. The moment Daniel saw me, his face went pale. Then the blood rushed back in a torrent of rage. He broke away from his legal team and marched toward us, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. Mother? What the hell are you doing here? He hissed, his voice low and dangerous. He looked at Leo, his eyes narrowing. And who is this? Another one of your projects from the charity board? Leo didn't flinch. He stepped slightly in front of me. A subtle movement that felt like a shield. My name is Leo Vance Daniel. I'm the district attorney's lead for white-collar crime. But today, I am appearing as private counsel for Mrs. Emily Halbrook. Daniel let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Private counsel? For what? Mother, you're supposed to be at the clinic. We had an agreement. Your health. Our agreement ended when you changed the locks on a house that bears my name on the deed, Daniel. I said, stepping out from behind Leo. I didn't whisper. I wanted the clerks and the bailiffs to hear. I am here to file a motion to vacate the temporary guardianship order you obtained through fraud. Vanessa joined him then, her grief instantly replaced by a sharp, calculating glare. Fraud? Mother, don't be dramatic. We have the doctor's reports. We have the records of your lapses. You have a doctor on your payroll, Vanessa, Leo interrupted, his voice cool and professional. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. And you have a series of wire transfers from Halbrook Enterprises to that doctor's private offshore account. Transfers that were authorized by Daniel 3 days before the medical evaluation was signed. The color drained from Daniel's face again. He glanced at his lawyers, who were now looking at Leo with newfound terror. They knew that name. They knew the reputation. This is an ambush, Daniel snarled. You've been brainwashed by this guy, Mother. He's probably just after the estate himself. The estate you've already depleted by 40%? I asked, tilting my head. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands? The failed skyrise project that you've been propping up with the family trust? I know it all, Daniel. I was the one who kept the ledgers while your father was too sick to speak. You thought I was just sitting in that library reading novels. I was reading your soul. The bailiff called the court to order. All rise. We took our seats. The judge, a formidable woman with a reputation for being no-nonsense, looked down at the filings on her desk. She looked at Daniel's team, then at Leo. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her eyebrows rising. I wasn't aware you took private family law cases. Only when they involve criminal conspiracy, Your Honor, Leo replied, standing up. We have filed an emergency motion to vacate. Not only do we have proof that the medical evaluation was bought and paid for, but we also have evidence that the petitioner, Mr. Daniel Halbrook, is currently under investigation by the DA's office for embezzlement from the very estate he claims to be protecting. A gasp went up from the small gallery. Vanessa gripped Daniel's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. That's a lie, Daniel shouted, forgetting where he was. She's crazy. Look at her, she's delusional. The judge banged her gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a whip. Sit down, Mr. Halbrook. One more outburst and I'll have you held in contempt. She turned her gaze back to the documents. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I looked over at Daniel. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at Leo, his eyes filled with a dawning realization. He saw the resemblance. He saw the way Leo held himself, the same way Thomas used to. The judge looked up, her expression unreadable. In light of the evidence presented regarding the financial conflict of interest and the questionable nature of the medical testimony, I am staying the guardianship order effective immediately. Furthermore, I am granting a temporary restraining order. Mr. Daniel Halbrook and Ms. Vanessa Halbrook are to have no contact with the respondent, and their access to all Halbrook Enterprise accounts is frozen pending a full forensic audit. Vanessa let out a small, strangled scream. Daniel just sat there, frozen. We're finished, he whispered, loud enough only for our table to hear. No, Daniel, I said, leaning toward him as the judge began to dismiss the court. You were finished the moment you thought I was just a ghost in my own home. I'm not the one leaving today. You are. As we walked out of the courtroom, the reporters who had been tipped off began to swarm. Leo kept a firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the sea of flashing lights. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was hiding. But as we reached the car, Leo's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went grim. What is it? I asked, the adrenaline beginning to fade into a cold dread. Daniel didn't just sell the house, Emily, Leo said, looking at me with eyes that were suddenly full of concern. He sold the contents. All of them. There's a moving crew at the mansion right now. They aren't just taking the furniture. The library. I gasped, my heart stopping. The 1922 Britannica. If they take those books, Leo said, throwing the car into gear, the evidence that can actually put him in prison disappears before we even get to the front gate. The tires of Leo's car shrieked as he pulled a frantic U-turn, leaving the courthouse and the swarm of reporters in a cloud of exhaust. I gripped the dashboard, my knuckles white. The victory in the courtroom felt hollow, a fragile glass trophy that was already cracking. How did they get there so fast? I managed to ask, my breath hitching in my throat. Daniel knew, Leo said. His jaw set so tight I thought his teeth might break. He knew that if the judge ruled against him, he'd have a window of maybe an hour before the marshals arrived to secure the property. He must have had the movers on standby, parked around the corner. The drive back to the Halbrook estate, which usually took 20 minutes, felt like an eternity. We wove through the city traffic, Leo utilizing his knowledge of backstreets and shortcuts. My mind was a whirlwind of images. The library, the smell of old leather, the way Thomas used to sit in that high-back chair, thinking he was untouchable. Behind that false front of encyclopedias lay the only truth left. The ledger that proved the Halbrook fortune was built on a foundation of lies, and that Daniel had been digging the grave even deeper. When we finally rounded the bend of the long, oak-lined driveway, my heart sank. A massive, unmarked white moving truck was backed up to the front portico. The heavy oak doors, the ones the locksmith had just rekeyed, were propped wide open. "Stay behind me," Leo commanded as he slammed the car into park. He didn't wait for an answer. He reached into his jacket, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't just a lawyer. He was a man who lived in a world where people fought back. I couldn't stay behind. This was my house. Those were my memories. I stepped out of the car and followed him into the foyer. The house looked like it had been hit by a whirlwind. The Persian rugs were rolled up like discarded bandages. The walls were bare, leaving pale rectangles where the portraits of my ancestors had hung just yesterday. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the floor above. "Hey, stop right there," Leo shouted. Two men in gray jumpsuits were lugging a marble bust toward the door. They paused, looking confused. "We have a work order, pal. Mr. Halbrook said everything goes." "Mr. Halbrook is under a court-ordered freeze," Leo barked, holding up his badge. "Drop it. Now. If another item leaves this house, you're all going to be processed as accomplices to grand larceny." The movers looked at each other, then at the badge, and slowly set the bus down. But the sound of crashing came from the library. I didn't wait for Leo. I ran toward the back of the house, my heels clicking frantically on the bare wood. I reached the library doors just in time to see a third mover shoving a stack of books into a cardboard box. "Get away from those," I screamed. The man turned, startled. He was holding a handful of volumes from the 1920s. My eyes darted to the shelf. The section was already empty. The B section, Britannica, was being swept into a bin. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," the man said, but his voice was drowned out by a familiar, sharp laugh from the corner of the room. Vanessa was sitting in the window nook, a glass of my expensive sherry in her hand. She looked at me with a cold, triumphant smirk. "You're too late, mother. Daniel might have lost the legal round, but I'm the one who handles the logistics. These antiques are already sold to a private collector. The truck leaves in 5 minutes, and once they're gone, they're untraceable." "Vanessa, stop this," I pleaded, stepping toward her. "That ledger, it's not just about the money. It's the only thing that can protect you from what Daniel has done. If the audit happens and that book is gone, the government will assume you were in on it too. They'll seize everything you own." Vanessa's smirk wavered for a fraction of a second, then hardened. "I'd rather be broke than let you and your whatever he is win. You think you can just bring a secret son into our lives and take what's ours? This was our inheritance." "It was a lie, Vanessa," I shouted. "Your father didn't leave you a fortune. He left you a crime scene. And Daniel is trying to make you the getaway driver." Leo entered the room then, his presence filling the space. He didn't look at Vanessa, his eyes went straight to the bin of books. "The truck isn't going anywhere. I've already called for backup. There are 2 squad cars blocking the end of the driveway. Vanessa turned pale, the glass of sherry trembling in her hand. You're bluffing. Try me, Leo said. He walked over to the mover. Hand me the box. The mover, seeing the cold fury in Leo's eyes, didn't hesitate. He handed over the cardboard box. Leo began to sift through the volumes, his movements frantic but precise. Asterisk History of Art. Gastronomy. Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 1. Asterisk. It's not here, Leo whispered, his face turning grim. I looked at the shelf. The false front was gone. The space behind it, the hidden compartment Thomas had installed decades ago, was empty. I looked back at Vanessa. She was smiling again, but it was a jagged, desperate smile. Looking for something specific? A little black book, perhaps? Daniel took that hours ago. He's not as stupid as you think, Mother. He knew exactly where Father kept the bodies buried. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. If Daniel had the ledger, he wouldn't just hide it. He would burn it. And with it, the only proof of the forged signatures, the offshore shell companies, and the embezzlement that had gutted my life. Where is he, Vanessa? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. Somewhere you'll never find him, she sneered. He's closing the deal. By the time the sun sets, Halbrook Enterprises will be a shell, the money will be moved, and you'll be left with a house full of empty rooms and a son who doesn't even call you Mom. Leo's phone chirped. He stepped away to take the call, his conversation short and clipped. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. The police just stopped a black sedan trying to exit through the service gate, Leo said, looking directly at Vanessa. Vanessa's eyes went wide. What? Daniel wasn't closing a deal, Leo continued, his voice dripping with irony. He was trying to catch a flight to Dubai. But he made a mistake. He used a company credit card to book the ticket. The same card I put a federal watch on 2 hours ago. Did they find it? I asked, my heart hammering. Did they find the ledger? Leo looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like grief in his eyes. They found the car, Emily. And they found Daniel. But the car was empty, Leo said. Except for a pile of ash in a metal trash can in the back seat. He burned it, Emily. He burned the evidence right before they pulled him over. Vanessa let out a jagged laugh. A sound of pure, spiteful joy. See? I told you. You have nothing. You're just an old woman in a big empty house. I looked around the library. The room where I had spent so many lonely years. The room where I had kept the secrets of a man who didn't love me and children who didn't respect me. I felt the weight of the silence, the weight of the loss. Then I looked at Leo. He was standing there, the son I had lost and found again. A man who had fought for me when he didn't have to. I walked over to the desk, the massive mahogany desk that the movers hadn't reached yet. I pulled open the bottom drawer and reached for the hidden catch beneath the wood. He burned the ledger, Vanessa. I said, my voice cold and clear. But he forgot one thing about your father. I pulled out a small, silver flash drive that had been taped to the underside of the drawer. Thomas was a paranoid man, I said, holding the drive up so the sunlight caught it. He never kept just one copy of anything. And I was the one who taught him how to use a computer. Vanessa's face fell into a mask of pure terror. But the real shock came when Leo looked at the drive and whispered, That's not just the ledger, Emily. Look at the serial number. That's the encryption key for the offshore accounts Daniel thinks he just emptied. The silence that followed my revelation was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thud of the movers downstairs as they continued to haul away the hollow remnants of my past. Vanessa stared at the silver flash drive in my hand, as if it were a ticking bomb. The sherry glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, but she didn't even flinch. The liquid pooled around her designer heels. A dark stain on the floor she had tried so hard to steal. You're lying, she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. Father never trusted anyone with his digital access. Not even Daniel. He didn't trust anyone, I agreed, stepping around the glass toward the mahogany desk. But he was also a man who feared losing his shadow. He kept this because he knew that one day, Daniel's ambition would outpace his intelligence. He told me it was an insurance policy for the Halbrook name. He just never realized I would be the one to cash it in. Leo stepped forward, his eyes locked on the drive. As a prosecutor, he had seen men go to prison for far less than what was likely contained on that small piece of metal. He held out his hand, his expression a mixture of professional focus and a sudden, quiet pride. If that's the encryption key, Emily, the ash in Daniel's car doesn't matter, Leo said. The blockchain records don't lie. If we can access those accounts, we can track every cent he moved. We can prove the intent to defraud the estate before he even reached the airport. I placed the drive in his palm. It felt light, almost weightless, despite carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar downfall. Vanessa, I said, turning back to my daughter. She looked smaller now, the fire of her defiance extinguished by the cold reality of the evidence. The marshals will be here in minutes. You can either stay here and wait for the handcuffs, or you can leave now and hope the audit finds you were merely negligent rather than complicit. Vanessa didn't say a word. She snatched her purse from the window nook and bolted toward the door, her heels clicking a desperate, uneven beat against the bare floor. She didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the library, and certainly not at me. Leo watched her go, then pulled a rugged laptop from his briefcase. He sat at the desk, the seat of power once occupied by a husband who had hidden me away, and plugged in the drive. The screen flickered to life, casting a blue glow over his sharp features. This is going to take some time to decrypt, he muttered, his fingers flying across the keys. But once the firewall is down, I can trigger an automatic freeze on every secondary account linked to Daniel's ID. He thinks he's sitting in a police station waiting for a lawyer, but by the time he gets his one phone call, he won't have enough money left to pay for the collect call. I walked over to the tall windows. Below, the police cruisers were finally pulling into the driveway, their blue and red lights painting the oak trees in eerie artificial colors. The movers were being lined up against the white truck, their hands behind their heads. It's over, isn't it? I asked, my reflection in the glass looking older, yet somehow more vibrant than the woman who had walked into the courthouse that morning. The legal battle is just starting, Leo replied without looking up. But the betrayal? Yes. That's over. You've taken back the ground they tried to bury you in. He paused, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He looked up at me, and for a second the district attorney vanished, leaving only the man who had been a secret for 24 years. Why did you keep it, Emily? Not just the drive. Why did you keep me a secret for so long? You could have used this against Thomas years ago. You could have left him and come to find me. The question was the one I had been running from since the day I handed a swaddled infant to a woman in a quiet park and promised never to look back. I sat on the edge of the desk, looking at the empty shelves where the books had been. Thomas was a king in this city, Leo, I said softly. But kings are fragile. He was terrified that if the world knew he had a wife who had a child from a previous life, a child he couldn't control, it would tarnish the Halbrook perfection. He threatened to use his influence to ensure you were never adopted, that you stayed in the system, that you were nothing. I stayed because by staying, I could negotiate for your life. I traded my freedom for your future. Every check I sent, every tuition payment I authorized through that blind trust. That was me buying you the world he tried to take away. Leo's expression softened. The hardness in his jaw relaxed, and for the first time, he reached out and placed his hand over mine. His skin was warm, a living connection to a past I thought I had lost forever. I spent a long time wondering why an anonymous woman cared enough to make sure I had the best of everything, he whispered. I thought it was guilt. I didn't realize it was a ransom payment. A loud knock echoed through the foyer. The marshals had arrived. Mrs. Halbrook? This is Marshal Miller. We have a court order to secure the premises. Leo stood up, his professional mask sliding back into place. That's our cue. I need to get this drive to the Bureau's tech lab. With the evidence Daniel burned in this backup, he's looking at 15 to 20 years for interstate fraud and embezzlement. We walked out of the library together. The foyer was full of men in windbreakers and uniforms. They were tagging the furniture, marking the items that would be held as evidence or returned to my sole possession. As we reached the front door, a black sedan pulled up behind the police cars. A man in a tailored suit stepped out. Mark, the longtime CFO of Halbrook Enterprises and the only man Thomas had actually respected. He looked at the chaos, then at me. Emily, he said breathless. I just heard about Daniel. The board is in an uproar. They're talking about dissolving the company to save what's left of the reputation. I looked at Mark, then at the house behind me, and finally at Leo. The company doesn't need to be dissolved, Mark, I said, my voice projecting across the foyer, silencing the marshals and the movers alike. It needs to be cleansed. Daniel was a parasite, not a leader. But who's going to run it? Mark asked. The stockholders are panicking. We need a name. Someone the banks trust. I looked at Leo. He was a prosecutor, a man of the law. He had no interest in the corporate throne. But he was a Halbrook in every way that mattered, blood, brains, and a backbone of steel. We'll discuss the board tomorrow, I told Mark. For tonight, you can tell the stockholders that the majority owner is back in the house. And she isn't leaving. Mark nodded, a look of immense relief crossing his face. He turned to leave, but I called out to him one last time. And Mark? Yes, Emily? Tell them that the Halbrook perfection is dead. We're going to try something new. The Halbrook truth. As Leo led me to his car, away from the flashing lights and the ghost of the life I had known, I felt a strange sense of peace. The doors had closed on the woman I was supposed to be. The quiet wife, the discarded mother, the senile victim. But as we drove away, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods near the gates. It was Vanessa. She wasn't running anymore. She was holding a phone to her ear. And even from the distance, I could see the predatory look on her face as she watched us pass, realizing that while Daniel was gone, the real war for the Halbrook name had only just shifted to a new, much darker front. The drive back to Leo's brownstone was bathed in the flickering orange of the city's sodium lights. Inside the car, the silence wasn't heavy or strained. It was the quiet of two soldiers retreating from a battlefield that had been won, yet remained littered with debris. I watched the city pass by. The diners filled with late-shift workers, the neon signs of pharmacies, the ordinary life that continued while my world had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt in a single day. Leo kept his eyes on the road, but his grip on the steering wheel was relaxed. The silver flash drive sat in the center console between us, a tiny beacon of power. Vanessa won't stop, I said, my voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. I saw her at the gate. She didn't look like a woman who had lost. She looked like a woman who was recalculating. Leo nodded slowly. She's the dangerous one, Emily. Daniel has ego. Ego makes you predictable. You want the throne, you want the praise, you want the title. But Vanessa? She has resentment. Resentment is a slow-burn fuel. She doesn't care about the throne as much as she cares about making sure no one else sits on it. She's already reaching out to the board, I predicted. She'll try to paint this as a family tragedy. She'll say I'm being manipulated by a rogue prosecutor who is using a long-lost connection to staging a hostile takeover. She'll turn the stockholders against us before the audit even begins. Then we don't give her the chance to tell the story, Leo said. He pulled the car to the curb in front of his home and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was jarring. Tonight, I'm taking this drive to the Bureau's secure lab. We aren't just going to audit the accounts. I'm going to pull the communication logs from the company server. Every email, every deleted text between Daniel and Vanessa regarding your care and the sale of the house. By tomorrow morning, the board won't just be worried about their shares. They'll be worried about their subpoenas. I stepped out into the cool night air. The brownstone felt like a sanctuary now. As we walked up the steps, I realized that for 65 years, I had lived in a house that was a monument to someone else's name. This small, crowded space of Leo's was the first place I had felt like I truly existed. Inside, Leo didn't head for the kitchen or the sofa. He went straight to his workspace, a desk cluttered with folders and a dual-monitor setup that stayed humming 24/7. He plugged the flash drive in, his fingers moving with a frantic, rhythmic certainty. You should sleep, Emily, he said without looking up. The next 48 hours are going to be a media circus. Once the news breaks that the Halbrook heir was arrested at the airport, the vultures will be circling your front door. I've spent 20 years sleeping through my life, Leo, I said, pulling a chair up beside him. I think I'd like to be awake for the ending. He glanced at me, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, the first real smile I had seen all day. It's not the ending. It's the discovery phase. The screen began to scroll with lines of code, then shifted into a clean, white interface. It was a mirror of the Halbrook Enterprise's internal ledger, but with a hidden tab labeled Project Phoenix. Leo clicked it. My breath caught. It wasn't just a list of accounts. It was a roadmap of betrayal. Daniel hadn't just been stealing. He had been setting up a parallel company, Phoenix Holdings, designed to buy the Halbrook assets for pennies on the dollar once he had successfully driven the main company into the ground. And at the bottom of the digital charter for Phoenix Holdings were two names listed as equal partners: Daniel Halbrook and Vanessa Halbrook. She wasn't just the logistics person, Leo whispered, his eyes scanning the dates. She was the architect. Look at this, Emily. She was the one who authorized the sale of your personal jewelry 3 months ago. She bypassed the estate's appraisal office entirely. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. The pearls I had worn to my wedding, the emeralds Thomas had given me after Daniel was born, they weren't lost or misplaced. My daughter had sold them to fund the very company that would ruin me. Wait, I said, pointing to a recurring payment at the bottom of the screen. What is that? Caregiver 101 foot. Leo clicked the link. A private cloud folder opened, revealing dozens of audio files. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I clicked the most recent one. The sound of my own voice filled the room, sounding confused and tired. Daniel, I don't remember agreeing to sell the piano. It was my mother's. Then Vanessa's voice, sharp and cold. You did agree, Mom. We talked about it yesterday. Don't you remember? You were so excited about the extra space. Maybe we should increase your dosage. You're getting confused again. There was the sound of a glass clinking, then a long, haunting silence. They were gaslighting you, Leo said, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage that made the air in the room feel heavy. They were recording your confusion to build the case for the guardianship. They were creating the evidence they needed by breaking you down piece by piece. I sat back, the room spinning. I had known they were greedy. I had known they were cold. But the realization that they had sat across from me at dinner, smiling and pouring my tea while systematically trying to erase my mind, was a level of cruelty I wasn't prepared for. They didn't just want the money, I whispered. They wanted to make sure I didn't even know who I was anymore. Leo shut the laptop with a sharp snap. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. I'm taking this to the director tonight. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is elder abuse and criminal conspiracy. Leo, wait, I said, standing up with him. I reached into my purse and pulled out the one thing I had kept from the library. Not a ledger, but a small, leather-bound diary Thomas had kept in his final days. There's one more thing you need to see. Something even Daniel didn't find. I opened the book to the final page. In Thomas's shaky, dying hand, he hadn't written a confession of love or a plea for forgiveness. He had written a single sentence that changed everything about the Halbrook legacy. The boy from the park is the only one who didn't inherit my rot. If the others find out, they will destroy him to keep the lie alive. Emily, give him the key only when the house is empty. Leo looked at the page, his face turning pale. He knew. All those years he knew I was out there. He knew, I said. And he was afraid of you, Leo. Not because of the scandal, but because you were the only part of his life that wasn't built on a bribe. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke our silence. Leo moved to the window, his hand going to the holster at his hip. He pulled the curtain back just an inch. Who is it? I asked. It's a black SUV, Leo said, his voice going flat and professional. No plats. 2 men just got out. He turned back to me, his eyes wide with a sudden, sharp realization. Emily, get into the basement. Now. Vanessa didn't call a lawyer. She called the people Daniel owed money to, and they know exactly where that flash drive is. The basement of Leo's brownstone was not a cellar. It was a reinforced archive, a narrow room lined with steel cabinets and a secondary server that hummed with a low, mechanical growl. Leo shoved me inside and slammed the heavy door, the deadbolt clicking with a finality that made my blood run cold. Stay away from the stairs, he hissed through the small, Reinforced glass slit. I've already triggered the silent alarm. The police will be here in 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes, Emily. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the hallway above. Then the sound began. A heavy, rhythmic pounding at the front door. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or the official bang of a marshal, but the violent, splintering force of a battering ram. On the third hit, the wood gave way. The sound of shattered glass and heavy boots flooded the house. "Where is it?" A voice growled, rough, low, and devoid of any human empathy. The girl said the old lady had it. "The drive. Give it up, Vance, and maybe you get to keep your badge." "You're trespassing on federal property." Leo's voice rang out, calm and lethal. "And you're underestimating how much I've been looking forward to this." The house erupted. The sound of a struggle, the heavy thud of bodies hitting walls, the crash of a lamp, and then the deafening crack of a gunshot. I screamed, my hands flying to my mouth, but I stayed in the corner as he told me. I thought of Daniel, sitting in a cold cell, and Vanessa, standing at the gate with a phone to her ear. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had sent executioners to finish what the lawyers couldn't. Silence followed. A long, suffocating minute where the only sound was the hum of the servers. Then the basement door groaned open. Leo stood there, his shirt torn, a dark bruise already blooming on his cheekbone. He was holding a service pistol in one hand, and the silver flash drive in the other. Behind him, the blue and red lights of the police cruisers began to pulse against the basement windows. "It's over," he breathed, leaning against the doorframe. "Truly over." 3 weeks later, the Halbrook Grand Hotel looked exactly as it had on the night of my birthday. The glass facade shimmered, and the red carpet was rolled out for the city's elite. But the name on the marquee had changed. It no longer read the Halbrook Gala. It read, the Vance Halbrook Foundation for Corporate Justice. I sat in the back of a sleek black sedan, looking at my reflection in the window. I wasn't wearing the simple blue dress that made me look invisible. I was wearing black silk, tailored and sharp with a single strand of pearls, the only set Vanessa hadn't managed to sell because I had hidden them in the one place she never looked, Thomas's old toolbox. Leo sat beside me. He had traded his charcoal suit for a tuxedo, looking every bit the man Thomas Halbrook had been afraid he would become. A son who couldn't be bought. "Are you ready?" he asked, checking his watch. "The board is waiting. Mark says they're terrified. They think you're going to liquidate the company and fire everyone who ever looked at Daniel the wrong way." "I'm not going to liquidate," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to renovate. A house is only as strong as its foundation, Leo. We're just replacing the rot." We stepped out of the car. The cameras began to flash instantly. Reporters shouted questions, their voices a chaotic chorus of "Mrs. Halbrook" and "Mr. Vance." We didn't stop. We walked up the red carpet, through the gold-rimmed doors and into the ballroom. The room went silent the moment we entered. Hundreds of people. The same people who had whispered about my declining health and senility just a month ago, now stood like statues. I saw Mark near the stage, nodding at me with a look of profound respect. But it was the table in the far corner that drew my eye. Vanessa was there. She wasn't in handcuffs. Leo's team was still building the elder abuse case, but she was a pariah. She sat alone, her gown looking tawdry and her eyes frantic. She looked at me, and for the first time in her life, I saw fear in her expression. Real, jagged fear. She realized that I wasn't just the mother who had raised her. I was the woman who had survived her. I walked up to the podium. I didn't need notes. I didn't need a teleprompter. I looked out at the room, at the people who had built their lives on the Halbrook name. "For 40 years, I began, my voice amplified and clear. "This company has been run on secrets. My husband believed that the appearance of perfection was more valuable than the truth. My son believed that power was something you stole when no one was looking." I paused, looking directly at Vanessa. They were wrong. Power is what remains when everything else is stripped away. It is the ability to stand in the ruins of your own life and decide to build something better. Today, Halbrook Enterprises is no longer a family dynasty. It is a public trust. The accounts that were hidden have been recovered. The debts that were forged have been erased. And the people who thought they could silence a 65-year-old woman have learned a very expensive lesson. The applause didn't start immediately. It began with a single person, Mark, and then spread like a wildfire through the room. It was the sound of a legacy shifting. After the speeches, after the handshakes and the hollow apologies from board members who were trying to save their own skins, Leo and I walked out onto the balcony. The city stretched out before us, a tapestry of lights and shadows. "What now?" Leo asked, leaning against the railing. "The DA's office wants me back full-time to lead the task force. The company is stable. You have your house back." I looked at the ring on my finger, not the wedding band Thomas had given me, but a simple gold band I had bought for myself. "I'm going to travel, Leo," I said. "I'm going to see the places I only read about in those encyclopedias. I'm going to live a life that doesn't require a secret ledger or a locked door." I turned to him and reached out, finally doing what I had wanted to do on that rainy doorstep weeks ago. I touched his cheek, my hand lingering on the faint scar from the night of the break-in. "And you," I said, "you're going to be the man I always knew you were. You don't have to be a Halbrook, Leo. You just have to be you." He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "I think I can manage that. But you're calling me from every city you visit. That's the deal." "Deal?" I whispered. As I looked back inside the ballroom, I saw the staff beginning to clear the tables. The perfection was gone, replaced by the messy, complicated reality of a new beginning. I thought of the locksmith, the black sedan, and the cold rain. All of it had been necessary. Every betrayal had been a key. Every tear had been a map. I walked back inside, not as a widow, not as a victim, and not as a secret. I walked through the doors of my new life, and this time, I was the one holding the keys. The house was finally quiet, and for the first time in 65 years, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like freedom.